Welcome back to another episode of CYC Youth Chat. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the idea of freedom in Christ. On the panel today, we've got Jenny, Michelle, Sam, and Beck. Now, to kick it off, I want to start with this issue. So, society often perceives religion as being something that binds you or something that holds you, and it holds you to maybe specific rules or practices. How do we, as Christians, consider that perception? What do we think about that? Sam?
I think it's a big misconception. I think that, but I can understand why they have this misconception, and I can understand that what it views and how it looks to them. But it is a big misconception that they have. Like when they ask me, or when non-Christians ask me, "What are you doing on a Friday night?" and I tell them I'm going to youth meeting, or they ask you, "What are you doing on a Sunday morning?" I tell them I'm going to mass. In their mind, they're like, "Why would he do that? Why would he go to mass? Why would he go to youth meeting when he can go have fun, when he can, just relax," for example. But to them, they don't understand that for me to go to youth meeting, for me to go to mass in the morning, is not something that I'm obliged to do. It's not something that I have to do, and that I feel that I'm bounded to do it. It's something that I want to do. Something that I feel that, Christ is fulfilled within me by doing that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's a misconception they have. They think that we have to do this because, and we're doing it only because we have to. We do it because we want to. We do it because we love to be in union with Christ. We do it because we love to be in His presence. So it's not, it's upsetting. It's a misconception that they think that we're bounded by religion, but we're not. We do it because we love Christ, and through our love for Him, we'll, serve Him and do these things for Him.
Well, what do you guys think about that perception?
I agree with Sam. I think it is a big misconception, especially because non-Christians tend to compare it to the way they live, and they see what they do as, I have the right, I have the choice to do whatever I want. But when you actually see the way that most people live their lives, it's in sin. And they don't realize that, and they don't realize that they are essentially bound by sin. So take something like drinking or smoking, for example. They think, it's a free country, I'm allowed to do whatever I want, so I'm going to drink and I'm going to smoke. But that leads to addiction, that leads to, all these things that they don't see, but, being a part of Christ we see, because in us, we have the free will to choose, but not only that, we have the love of Christ and, the willingness to do everything for Christ.
Yeah. And these things will bound you more than religion. That's the funny thing, that these things like drinking or whatever, they're addictive, and they will bound them and keep them in chains more than religion, which religion doesn't at all, completely, that's a misconception.
Yeah, so moving on from that definition, Jenny, how does Christ in specific set us free? Well, what has He done to set us free?
What He's done. So to be free, I think, is to in Christ, means that you connect to the truth. And we know that the truth is something that doesn't change, and everything in this world changes except for God. So when you know God, you know the truth. And we also have our own free will as well. So we get to make our own decisions, which, like if someone told you you can make all the decisions in your life, you'll feel free. And that's what it is. That's what it is in Christianity. It's not a set of rules at church, like you got to go to church on Sundays, you got to pray like this, you got to do that. These are guidelines on how to live, and it's our choice to follow them. It's our choice to, do the right thing or do the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. And when Christ came to die on the cross, what do you think was the main thing setting us free from? What do you guys think?
Sin, of course, that He's given us the possibility of going to heaven, of course. That's what we've been taught since we were little, and what it comes down to is grace. He's given us that free gift. He's given us that freedom.
Yeah. So before Christ, sin, we had sin in our lives, and obviously the punishment for sin was death. And for all those who sinned, their punishment was death. And I think Christ's death, freed us from that bondage of sin. It says in Hebrews chapter 2 verse 14, it says to release those who through the fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. So it was, the bondage of sin that, Christ freed us from. And and that's, it says it throughout the whole Bible that the truth will set you free, and that was Christ's role. That in Christ we are free, not only from the bondage of sin, but sin itself. Like not only from the consequences and the punishment of sin, but sin itself as well.
And when the truth has set us free and we feel free, what should we be outwardly displaying to people? How should we be acting as Christians if we're free?
I think once we're free, because we feel that unity with God and that love with God, we'd be acting in a Christ-like manner. We'd be acting and behaving in a way that Christ wanted us to. And that's not saying because we had to, but because we want to. And that's kind of the freedom in Christ that we're talking about. So people would see, the constant joy and peace that, we're brought to by Christ and being free in Christ, and, being able to help others and guide them and, love them, and showing that Christ-like love, I think is one of the main signs of being free in Christ.
I think it's something that's not even on purpose. I think it's something that's unintentional. You look at people who we consider free, all the saints of our church, and if we'd met them, we'd know that they are free because they are wholeheartedly content. They know, they are sure. St. Paul, he was so sure that he was free, in the grace that God had given him. It's something that's so unintentional. It emanates.
How can we think we're free if often as Christians we're given tribulations, we're given trouble in our life? How can we think we're free if we're always sort of bound by these things?
I think it's definitely a difficult thing to accept, and I think that the tribulations in our life do serve as ways in which we can be bound to sin, but we have to acknowledge that who set us free, and we have to acknowledge that by what means Christ set us free. So Galatians 5 verse 1 says, "Stand fast therefore in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage." So those temptations, drinking, all the bad things in life, they can really entangle us, and they can really chain us to sin, and we can be chained through them. So what it's saying is that Christ already freed us from sin through his death. Why would we go again and be entangled to these sort of temptations? Do you know what I mean? There are temptations in the world, and they do exist, and there are tribulations. But it is our choice, and that's the free will that God's given us, to overcome these temptations and not to be bound by them. Do you know what I'm saying?
I get that actually. Yeah, so I think we've touched on a few good concepts now, and we'll probably leave the next ones to the next segment of the episode. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you guys in the next part. See ya. Welcome back to the second part about freedom in Christ. Now, earlier in the episode, we were discussing key issues to do with what is freedom. We also discussed the role of society's perception of freedom. Now I want to get into a first question, which is, what are the obstacles to freedom in Christ? Sam?
I think there are many obstacles to freedom in Christ, but one of the biggest is sin. The one thing that we are bounded by, the one thing that leads us to bondage is sin. So many times, sin can deter us from freedom in Christ, and we can feel that we are, instead of being free in Christ, we are bounded by sin, and that we are chained to sin. So I think that's definitely one of the biggest obstacles. But I don't know, Jen, what do you think?
Definitely sin, and there's a lot of things that come under that category. So a lot of things like smoking, drugs, alcohol, all that kind of things. Anything that controls you, okay, is not giving you an option to choose. So, for example, if someone's addicted, we said this earlier, I think, yeah. So if someone's addicted to drugs or alcohol or smoking, they keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and it leaves them no choice to stop or to, choose to do other things. So anything that controls you, and even our thoughts and possessions, things.
How about the idea of obsession? What do you think of that?
100%, like obsessions on anything other than Christ, of course, you will feel like a slave to it. You won't feel free. You will feel there's no reward back from that, whatever that obstacle is, whether it's your own personal sin, whether it's selfishness, pride, anything, or just something that it's an addiction that you can't get out of. You will never feel free in it.
For some reason, whenever someone's when you talk about that, it reminds me of the, Coyote in Roadrunner. You know how they're always like, Cody's always trying to get the Roadrunner, right? And his one aim in life is just to kill the other guy, right? But if you look at the show closely, and I used to watch it like crazy, like a kid. It's pretty exciting. He gets blown up and stuff, but when you notice it and you look at it deep down, the guy never is at peace. He's never happy, and the other guy is just running around enjoying his life. But this Cody guy is always obsessed with getting, and he can't do it. And it's as if he's is bonded to hurting the other guy, and he's not free. The other man, the Roadrunner is free in Christ. It looks like it. I guess he's. This leads on to another question. I think in the Bible, it often refers to the idea of servants and slaves. Now, I want to put it to you. Are we slaves in Christ, or are we servants in Christ? Or are we both? What do you think? Or are we something else?
I think it depends from what angle you take it at.
Yeah.
It depends from what connotations you attach to being a servant and what implications you attach to being a slave. So, but I think that there are many examples for both, and I would like to say that you are definitely both a servant of Christ and a slave of Christ. But I feel that you establish a greater longing to be with Christ if you were to say that I was a slave to Christ, because Christ never sort of forces you to be with Him. He never forces you to love Him and to be bound to Him, sort of thing. But for you to come out of your own will, and for you to come out of your own choice and say, I'm a slave to Christ, that is your decision to be bound to Christ. That is your decision to say, I am a slave to Christ. He is my master. And that's what I love when people say that I'm a slave, when people would say I'm a slave to Christ. Because it is out of your own decision, out of your own free will to say that Christ is my master and I am a slave to Him.
I don't know. I don't feel the same way. I feel the connotations to the word slave, it's quite negative, Often if you look at slavery, it's the idea that, someone is put under another person against his will, yeah? And he has no choice about it. But I feel like with Christ, you have the choice. It's your free will to be put under, to be with Christ. And also as well, you want to serve Him. So, I don't know, I take the point, maybe servant. What do you guys think?
I kind of agree with Sam, because although we are both a slave and a servant, I think it's one of those terminologies where many people get confused, and it's very highly misunderstood. Because I know a lot of people would read St. Paul's writings, and he refers to himself as a slave, and people see that and they don't kind of understand it. I guess.
Maybe I think he could be saying it in the way that he acts as a slave. Maybe he acts as someone that is put under the servitude of someone else. So.
I think what's important is to highlight what Sam was saying, how although he acts as a slave, it is not that someone has put him in that position. It is the fact that he has done it out of his own freedom in Christ, out of his own will.
It's like a free slave.
And love. Yeah. So yeah. But I think if I had to choose a terminology, I don't think I'd choose either slave or servant.
Fair enough. You have any thoughts?
No, you covered everything. So
Covered it.
Because I think in Galatians, I think it's put perfectly where it says, in chapter 4, verse 7, therefore you are no longer a slave but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. So I think instead of viewing ourselves as slaves or as servants, although it is good in terms of humbling ourselves in that position and in our love and will for Christ, also we need to see ourselves as sons and daughters of Christ as well.
And not have that perception that we're just doing it, because we have to do it. It's better we do it because we want to do it. That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, because I think our love for Christ and our willingness, to be united with Him and being part of that freedom in Christ, I think is best seen in the relationship that you see as between a parent and a child, and not between a master and a slave or a master and a servant.
Yeah, what comes to mind when we mention or we compare a slave with a son is the prodigal son, the prodigal son, how he ran away and he was in, with the pigs, with the swine, and he said, no, I'm going to go back to my father's house and be as one of his hired servants, and be as sort of like a slave sort of thing. But as he was walking, the father realized, and the father saw him from afar, and he ran to him. So I think if we come with the intention of our heart that we are slaves to Christ and we want to be that, Christ will uplift us to become His own son. Christ will uplift us to the point where we're not slaves, but we're like sons of Christ and sons and daughters of Christ.
I guess the concept here Paul's talking about is humbling yourself before God.
100%.
And a slave is definitely the most humble form of any human.
Yeah.
It's not the best thing, and in society especially, it's not a good thing at all. But I guess if you humble yourself to that point, God He has to lift you up. He can't see someone being like that.
What I love about what Sam brought up in terms of the prodigal son parable is that we tend to overlook the fact that, so we're talking about freedom. So he, in his freedom and in his free will, chose to live in the world. And then only through that did he realize that it's not true freedom, because he ended up being bound by the world. And then so he got so bound up by his sins and ended up, as Sam said, living with the swine, that it was only through choosing that freedom and coming back. And in what we would say in comparison in our lives would be people who choose to live in the world and realizing that, yes, a life full of sin is actually a slavery to sin. And then realizing that only when we come back and participate in that freedom in Christ are we actually truly ever free.
It's interesting because, before he left, he must have thought, I'm missing out on so much. Like, he must have been sitting in his house, and even though he's given abundance of wealth in his father's house, he's seeing what, he doesn't have. And sometimes, what we don't have is better kept away, I think.
I think that's a real danger, especially when it comes to people our age, like the youth in the church. And being like this day and age, 21st century, where we're surrounded by technology and social media and everything. I don't know if you guys have heard the term FOMO, fear of missing out.
Fear of missing out, yeah.
There's this constant fear that you're missing out on something somewhere. And I think only once do we come to realize that we have everything once we have God. So what are we missing out in the world?
Yeah. A lot of people say, be free, go with the wind and be, go as life takes you. But that's not true freedom. True freedom is freedom in Christ. True freedom is the freedom that He offers you. And it's not physical. That's the thing. People think that freedom is doing what they want, and that's society's sort of stereotype, that to be free is to do whatever you want. But that's not freedom. Freedom in Christ.
Talk about freedom within the constraints of rules. Talk about that issue.
I think what the church has is not necessarily rules. It's not something that you impose upon you. It's not you have to do this, you have to that. But in terms of freedom of the church offers you to get closer to God. Offers you that opportunity, offers you those steps, those stepping stones for you to get closer to Christ. And it is your own free will, is your own choice to take that and to be more free in Christ or to be less free. Do you, I don't know.
I get that.
Yeah.
And one main aspect of freedom is what we don't realize. Earthly freedom is temporary.
Yeah.
It's for as long as we're here on earth. But freedom in Christ is eternal. And the only way it is eternal is if we choose to live in that freedom in Christ here while we're on earth. So you can't choose, I'll live earthly freedom while I'm here, and then I'll get Christly and godly freedom. But it doesn't work that way. You need to live your life freedom in Christ, and you need to live your life according to Christ in order to attain that freedom in Christ in heaven as well.
One last thing, do you guys have any favorite contemporary examples of people you really look up to that gave up the world and maybe and found that freedom in Christ that we're talking about?
I think Father Lazarus from Australia, and he went and became a monk in Egypt. I think he found the freedom in Christ, and he didn't. As a monk, he didn't find that he was bound to anything here on earth. So he decided to leave the world and to become free in Christ by himself, which I admire that completely. So I think he's one of my biggest idols.
I just had a quote come to mind. It was by St. Augustine, and he understood, and he said, I sit on top of the world when I desire nothing. He understood that the things, the temptations of this world, are really cages that will lock you in, and to truly be free is to not want those things.
That's a good point.
There's a lot of people that come to mind, a lot of monks and nuns, but one person that strikes me is Abuna Bishoy Kamil. He was a priest, and he asked God to give him cancer, and that's taking away your freedom and giving you suffering as well. But he took it all with joy, and he chose to have that as well. So yeah,
it's a pretty big example.
Yeah, definitely. I think, but what's important is that we tend to miss the daily examples that we see as well. As amazing as those examples are, and as I said, there's so many that Jenny said that you can choose from in terms of monks and nuns and saints. But it's that daily struggle that you kind of see people have, where it's that one choice during the day where they choose to live in the freedom of Christ and not in the freedom of the world. And I think it's those little steps that we also need to acknowledge in life, not just for ourselves, but the people around us, because that's what encourages us to take the next step in the freedom of Christ. So, yeah.
God provides you with those opportunities, those people
That's
in
it.
your life that show you
Yeah.
freedom.
No, I really appreciate that. No, thanks guys for joining us on the episode today. It's really been a good discussion. To sum it up, we've discussed the issues of false freedom at the start. We looked at the idea that you could be feeling you're free, but in actual fact, you might be bound by something. You might be bound by a sense of sin or any sort of addiction. We also talked about the idea that, the perceptions in society, how they see us, but we also realized that we as Christians feel that we are doing it out of our own will, and it's not something we're forced to do. We also discussed the idea of obstacles. So we said that there are many obstacles in our life of freedom, but we can overcome them through Christ. And lastly, we discussed the idea of servants or servitude and the idea of slaves. But we recognize that I think it's a combination of the two. It's the idea of being humble, and it's also the idea of doing it out of your own will. You want to serve Christ and grow further. But thanks very much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to the next discussion on this. See you guys soon.